Welcome back, friends. I'm going to wrap up the course here, but I want to go over the entire project again, make sure that all the pieces that we need are in place. So first of all, remember in SQL Server we had a database called MyDBase. Within this we had tables, and one of the tables in the project that we've been using is called Employees Table. And again, make sure that under the keys you had the basic PK employee. And remember under the triggers we had the update sales table trigger. So make sure you've got those items as they've been developed throughout the course. And if you want to see what's inside, you can basically just double click on it and it's going to bring up the code that is inside, okay? I'm going to put the database and all of the project files together in a zipped up folder under lesson resources. You should be able to access all of it. All right. And then, so that's for the employees table. Let me pull down and make sure now under the sales table, you've got those columns there. ID, primary key, employee ID, foreign key, date sold, month only, amount. Obviously at this stage, what you may want to consider as an extension of the project is how could you add some kind of graphical control, like a chart control or something like that. I'm not going to show you, but that's a way of extending everything and so on. Really, there's no limit at this point, right? Just use your imagination, and that's how I always think about it. And make sure that under the keys folder you have PK sales and then FK emp ID. So those are the tables. And now remember also under the security folder, make sure you've got IIS Apple dashboard so you can access it from the website. And you right click and go to its properties. Make sure that you have some basic settings here. So let's take a look. That it's inside the data reader and data writer where it says database role membership, that you've got those. And it looks like this under general, membership, data reader writer. Down below under server objects and under security again, under the server that is, remember, let me collapse some of these. So under security and logins, remember we added this one also, right? IIS app pool dashboard. Okay, let's take a look at those properties here for a second. So they look like this. So notice that the default database is MyDBase, login name as shown here. Server roles, public, user mapping. Give it a second here. So this is mapped, as you can see, to MyDBase. And it says IIS app pool / dashboard. And default schema DBO, that's fine. Okay, I hope you've got that. Now remember in IIS, we had a site called dashboard. So when you click on it, it gives you all of these options. When you expand that, you should see content and scripts. So remember the scripts folder is basically generated when you add jQuery. Same thing with the content. There's a themes folder in there. We don't have to worry about what actually is contained in it. We don't really use it too much, directly at least. So we should have dashboard, content, and scripts automatically generated essentially. And the only thing that I want to show you here is this one. If you right click on dashboard and you go over to manage website and then advanced settings, it looks like it's shown here, okay? So make sure yours is matching. And remember, all of this is coming from our C drive, where we had a folder named dashboard, where we've been placing all of our files in Visual Studio. Okay. One thing that might be useful is if you right click on default document and you go over to open feature, and notice that over here, take a look. You see where it says main.aspx? I'm going to remove that. And sometimes what happens is this, take a look. So imagine in Visual Studio over here, in the Solution Explorer, right, we have our file named main.aspx, as shown here. So over here now in IIS, if you don't have that set, this is what you do. You basically click Add, upper right hand side, and then just type in the name, main.aspx, and click OK. And the nice part is when you launch the site now, it's going to open by default to that page. Again, if you don't have it, take a look. So disable it for a second. Okay, and try to launch the page without main.aspx set as the default. So right click, manage website, and then go over to browse. Let's see what happens when I try that. Okay, you're gonna get one of these, obviously. On the other hand, well, I'm not sure that it's obvious, but that's what happens. Take main.aspx and just enable it as the default document, and then try to run the site. So right click on dashboard, go over to manage website, and browse. And it should come up with main.aspx as the default page, you see? There it is. So that's working as expected at this point. And let's just make sure that everything can be done as usual. Yes, you can still print. And remember that when you print here, if you look very carefully, let me shut that one down. I'm going to try the next one here where it says print and then sales records. Make sure behind this main thing that shows here, right? If you look very carefully behind it, upper left-hand side, there's a hint of the table. Yeah, make sure you've got that. And then this panel where you print actually shows over it. All right, so that came from jQuery if you remember back. Let me shut that down. All right, now let's go through the code a little bit in detail. Let me close the Solution Explorer. And remember, in the head section, we should have these. So the reference to the style sheet and the jQuery and the jQuery UI, user interface. Make sure you've got those. Then further, let me just shut down the site. Remember, we had the body, and within the body, we had this form, basic, right here. And within the form, the first object was the dropdown that defines the theme list with these features that you see right here. Now, after the dropdown, as you see, we had, I have to be really careful now because this can seem like way too much, but we had a script manager, which was needed for the update panel, if you remember back. So opening and closing tags for the script manager right here. Okay, then after that, we had the div, the main div that contains everything. So ID dv div for details view div, class element, style position absolute, so it doesn't drift when we reload the page. And that div, as you can see, the first thing that it contains is a checkbox with these settings here. ID, auto postback, checked, and run at server. Okay, next stage we had the unchecked changed, and it says check details view underscore checked change. So remember, that is so because over here under main.aspx.cs, we had this thing right here, right? This block runs when we interact with the checkbox. So make sure you've got that code. All right, so that's the checkbox. And remember, the purpose of the checkbox is to control the panel that shows the grid views or closes them out of view. All right, so after the checkbox, we had the update panel as shown here. And within the update, you had a content template. And within the content template now, you had the panel. And the panel, lastly, as you can see, contains the details view right here with those settings. And remember that the detail panel had two events, data source ID. So employees table source, correct? That's how we connected to SQL Server. And it had this one on item deleted as shown here. So remember, this here is the reference to the C# file. So make sure you have employees underscore item deleted in C# right here. And the effect here, remember, was to take the sales grid view and bind it. So it's updated, and take the summary grid view and bind it. So it's also updated. Next, after that, we had a whole bunch of fields. And again, at this point, I'm going to have to make it smaller so it kind of doesn't look too messy. So we had these basic fields. As you can see, we had the employee ID, the first name, the last name, and then the show delete button set to true. Show edit button true, show insert button true. So make sure you've got those also, okay, under the command fields. By command, they mean the delete button, the edit button, and the insert button. Make sure you've got those. And then we close the details view. All right, after that, we have this div with the ID of summary div. And remember, we put that here so we can print it, so that we can print basically the grid as neatly formatted with the grid of the kind that you see in Excel. So that's why we have this here, right? So that's the div ID summary div. And make sure that is closed down below right here. And within that, we have the grid view of ID GV summary. And again, make sure it's got a data source ID SQL summary sales table. Right, columns within it are shown here. And here, let's take a look. Let me see whether I can split any of these over horizontal lines so they fit a little better. That's good. Okay, so here, remember on the columns, you had the template field. We converted it to a template field for total sales. And down below, specifically, take a look here. Again, this just doesn't fit anymore, so I need to make it smaller still, so it doesn't look too bad. We had the run at server, and then we had the text under the item template. And make sure here where it says bind, I left the name as column 1, and then 0:C for currency. Okay? So this is the item template under the total sales. Okay. And then the last bit was the bound field, data field employee ID. So this is the summary grid view, okay? Right here, summary grid view. It's just so much. Hold on, I need to, okay, like this. Then down below now, I have to be careful again. We have an SQL data source, SQL summary sales table. So remember, you're going to use the connection string for my DBase connection string. And as you can see, this is the one that has the select command set to select some amount, employee ID from sales table, where empid equals @empid grouped by employee ID. So this is where we made the selection so we can show grouped amounts. Okay, in other words, the sum of the amount in the table. So remember that this here, this data source is being used. Let me scroll up. You gotta up here with the summary grid view. See data source ID, SQL summary sales table. Down below, ID, SQL summary sales table. So this is being used up above, okay, with this grid view here. All right, next. And notice that over here also we had within this SQL data source, SQL summary sales table, we had the control parameter, and it says control ID DV employees, name empid, property name selected value. And we had that there, remember, because we want the controls to be synchronized, okay? So in other words, whatever shows up in the details view, you want to make sure everything is synchronized down below in the summary grid view. So because remember up here we had @empid, that value is coming from the details view, and I know that because over here it says control ID DV employees name empid. That's how you keep the summary view and the details view synchronized. Okay, next. Then we had a sales div, and again that was necessary, so when we print that, it looks like a nice grid. All right, grid view, so that was GV sales, and again it's got a whole bunch of similar properties. Data key names ID, data source ID, sales table data source, allow paging true, allows sorting true. And now again, make sure when you interact with this, on row deleted and on row updated, it's got two calls to C#. So let's go into the page for a second. Row deleted and row updated, GV sales. So over here I've got GV sales underscore row deleted, and it takes the summary grid view and it binds it to the data so it gets updated. And then for GV sales underscore row updated, so when you update a row of records, and again, make sure you do GV summary dot data bind. You want the summary grid view to keep updated with the latest information from the table. Next, let's see. Now remember, command fields are things like show delete button and then show edit button true. So edit and delete buttons as command fields. Then after that, you have the regular fields or columns in the grid view. Employee ID, header text emp ID, you can change that here. Right, maybe you wanted to say employee ID instead of emp ID. Sort expression, emp ID, correct. You can sort on it. After that, we had a template field, so we took one of the existing fields and we converted it to a template field, so we can style it. So header text was date sold. You can change that if you like. Sort expression, date sold, so it's sortable by that field in the grid view. Edit item template, that looks as shown here. That can stay. Okay, next, with the item template, remember that I had it set as date sold, comma, and then 0, :D, because we want the short date showing here. So under item template, I've got it set that way. Okay. Lastly, though we haven't made much use of this field called month only, I wanted to show you that it's possible, and then maybe if you wanted to make a chart or something based on that, you could do it. I'm going to let your imagination, decide what use you can make of it. And let's see, for the template field, again down below, remember this is the month only. Take a look. This is for the amount now. And again, notice that for the item template, what you see, it says amount, comma, and then 0, :C. You want to display as currency here. Okay, and lastly on the bottom, we had a big SQL data source again. So if I get the connection string, the insert command, select command, all of these little things, as you can see, are numerous. So delete command, this is where you're deleting. Where employee ID equals @employee ID, you're inserting also through here. You can select from here, and you can update from here also as shown. Okay, so this is the employees table data source. Then you had a collection of delete parameters, employee ID, you're deleting by that. Insert parameters. So as you can see, you can stick in the first name and last name. Update parameters, as shown here. Okay, and lastly, we had one more, the sales table data source. All right, and again, if you look to it very carefully, it's kind of similar to what we've seen before. You need to break this over multiple lines. It just gets a little bit too much after a while. Okay, let's see. And here you can do all kinds of stuff as usual. Let me see, there you go. So this is sales table data source. Okay, so you have the delete command, the insert command, the select command, the update commands. Okay, the usual collection of parameters for deletion, insertion, selection, and updating. Lastly, on the bottom, we had this div that contained a sticky. Within that, we placed a text area. And under that, we had a menu so that we can print. And lastly, under all of that, we had our block of jQuery code, which is pretty extensive at this point. So that looks as shown here. All right, and I'm going to push down a little bit. Again, pause and read through it carefully. Remember, it's under lesson resources. And then that was the portion that prints. Okay, let me pull down. And that was just about everything. So this, on my computer, this thing here is about 260 lines of code, okay? Of markup and so on. About 260 lines. I know that from the status bar on the bottom of Visual Studio. Right, in main.aspx.cs, the code is pretty much as shown here. Okay, let me interact with the page one more time. I remember that at the very beginning, we have Azure, Bisq, okay, that's working. At the very beginning in IIS, we created a website. We called it dashboard.home, and then main.aspx was basically the default page. So that's loading properly now. Remember that the way we write it in Visual Studio is one way. Then by the time it goes over to the browser, there's a considerable amount of like auto-generated code that has been added. and some of the items that appear one way in Visual Studio are converted basically to more basic items or elements in HTML. Keep that in mind. Okay, let me close this for a second, and make sure now in Solution Explorer you have these basic files. So the content folder, the scripts folder, main.aspx, packages.config, and these packages folder contains these, as you can see here. Okay, jQuery references. All right, then remember we had stylesheet.css, which looks as shown here. Okay, and then lastly, inside web.config, this is the way mine looks at its final form. You've got basically the MyDBase connection string. You've got a key, and the value is as shown here. Okay, down below, you see when you add a default page, it says system.webserver, and then default document files, and then add value main.aspx. So this is how it looks after you make a change in IIS. A default document, you should have a key added here. And that's my version of web.config. All right, and I'm going to leave it here. And thank you so much, and I'll see you in another course.